Okay, Screencast chapters 1, 2, and 3, part 2. We last left off with the acid colors. We were talking about that psychedelic artwork of the 60s and those fluorescent colors. Generally, people who were on acid trips were taking a look at those and getting some really funky effects. So, what are the uses of colors? We have a listing here. Give spatial quality to a picture, to create a mood and symbolize ideas, express emotions and feelings, to attract and direct attention, giving organization to a composition, and aesthetic appeal by organized color relationships. So let's talk a little bit about the give spatial quality to a picture. It also kind of goes hand in foot with to attract and direct attention, giving organization to a composition. So here's my scenario. We have a lush green landscape, blue sky. And in the lower right-hand corner, we have a little campfire with warm oranges and reds and yellows. Okay, we are attracting and directing your attention to that fire. The artist is controlling where you're looking. Why? Because warm colors come forward and cool colors go back. So our attention is drawn to the yellows, the oranges, and the reds. Okay, now to give spatial quality and kind of controlling the picture, we can take that same lush green landscape with the lower right hand corner having the campfire and put in the upper left hand corner a hot air balloon that is red. We are making you look back and forth from the fire to the balloon. So we are controlling where you look back and forth. Okay, so color can control what we do. Now we also create a mood and symbolize ideas or express emotions and feelings. These go together because we know that certain colors have certain meanings or certain colors have certain feelings. So when a bride gets married, when we were talking about the Arnolfini wedding, traditionally now we think of white because of purity and innocence. That's that color having that symbolizing those ideas. Those feelings come from things like when you're red, you're so mad, you're so angry, or passion. Red has that meaning. We think of, blue as sad. These are the ways in which we do that mood symbolizing ideas and then also emotions and feelings. Now, aesthetic appeal by organized color relationships. Those kind of change throughout cultures and throughout time. Certain places and certain times have certain color themes. Example, I was born in the 70s. So in the 70s, a popular color would have been, for carpeting, would have been that shag green carpeting. You've probably heard about it. It's like an avocado green color. My mom had everything that was avocado green. Her refrigerators, her sinks, the toilets, the bathtubs, everything was that color. And at that particular time, it was that popular color. So that's that aesthetic appeal. But sometimes certain colors kind of just go together. You have black and white. You have red and green. So that's that aesthetic appeal and organizing those color relationships to go together. Okay, now tint and shade. These are a couple of definitions that I'm sure you are probably wrong on what you think of tint is, because we think of tinting the windows of our cars. So we're darkening the windows of our cars. You can see here the definition is you add white to a color which lightens the value of a color. That's what a tint is. We're lightening the value. Now a shade is when we add black to a color and it lowers the value of the color. So of course something that's lightened comes forward, something that's darkened goes back. Now warm colors and cool colors. Warm colors are of course that yellow, red, and orange. They tend to come forward in space. Cool colors are the blue, green, and violet. They tend to go back in space. Now, color theory, where does all this come from? It comes from experiments that were made by Sir Isaac Newton. In 1666, he passed a ray of light through a prism which refracted and produced a rainbow. So here you see one of the earlier ideas of what he thought of was the color wheel. Make sure you're remembering names and dates when I give those. Now, light and pigment. This one can be a little confusing. All colors are dependent on light, and no object possesses color, for without light there would be no color. Okay, so remember, color is the wavelength of light. So if you have no light, in essence, there should be no color. So light is considered to be the white light of the sum of all colors. In other words, you combine all the colors, you get white. Now that's only with light. Take a look at page 92, figure 427. You'll see an illustration in your text. What I usually tell students is, especially if those students have been involved in the theater or stage or anything, you have those colored lights that shine down on the stage. They put what's called a colored gel over the top of the light, right? So that will make it a certain color. So if we took a blue, a yellow, and a red, shined it down onto the floor of the stage, and mind you, I know the stage's floor are normally black, but if it was white, then you would see when they intersect that it would be white, not a combination of colors, which is what we normally think of is the pigment. This is when you mix all colors with pigment, you get what is called a neutral, and that's a black, almost colorless, brownish, grayish, just a yucky color. So the difference between mixing with light, you're transparent, mixing with pigment, you are opaque. So that's where you get the yucky color. With light, it stays bright. Now, mixing light is considered to be an additive process, by which mixing pigment is a subtractive process. Color harmonies, also known as color schemes. It is a selective use of two or more colors in a single composition. And here I think this one is pretty good. An example, taking a photograph of a flower found in nature and then taking that and transporting those colors into a composition of art. It transitions pretty well. Now, categories of color harmonies. There are a listing here. You have monochromatic, complementary, analogous, and triad. So I think we've kind of broached these a little bit already. So monochromatic is where you take one color and you add the tint and the shade to it. So all you're doing is changing the values with white and with black. So here's a pretty good example of blue mixed with white and black in a composition. Page 93, figure 428 in your text is another example of a monochromatic piece of art. Now, complementary colors, this is when a primary, which when placed opposite the secondary, produces other two primaries on the color wheel. So what it does is it takes those opposite colors, we talked about the red and the green or the orange and the blue, they make each other brighter and stronger. This example by Marc Chagall with the green chicken and the red donkey, very good example of use of complementary colors. Now, a triad, these are color harmonies that are three of equal distance from one another on the color wheel. So example, your primary colors or your secondary colors. This example of the Mondrian piece is a really good example because you see he's using yellow, red, and blue. Page 496, figure 2126, you'll see another Mondrian piece in your text. Now, optical effects of color. This is when certain uses and combinations of colors can play tricks on our eyes. Some colors are even said to vibrate. So what I would like you to do is take and stare at the dot in the middle of the white star for as long as you possibly can, and then blink and look at the dot in the white box. Okay, what you should see is the complement of the white star. So it should be black, okay? So those are generally the examples that you will see on your exam, okay? Complementary colors can be a little difficult, especially with this and dealing with the optical effects, because when we look at something in color, which we will on the next slide, depending upon whether you see it as a warm color or a cool color will result in a different color that you will see in that after image. Now, what this is simultaneous contrast. If you place two complementary colors next to each other, both of them will seem brilliant. Red is redder, green is greener. So that's that complement that we're seeing. Black and white will be that example, just a reminder. Okay, now after image, like I said, is what we're dealing with. This is an image that persists after the visual stimulus for that image has been removed. We've all done this. Your mom has said, don't stare at the sun, don't look at the sun, don't stare at the light. You get that ghosting colors of image that is kind of burned into your eyes. Okay, those ghosts of colors that appear basically when your eye is fatigued. The tendency, again, is for the eyes to see the complementary hue. So again, stare at the dot in the middle of the red box for as long as you can, and then look at the dot in the white box and blink. You should see, because we know the complement of red, green. But like I said, depending on whether you see this as a warm red or a cool red, will depend on whether you see it as a green or kind of a blue-green color. Okay, because of that, some of you in this class might be colorblind. I can't necessarily ask you to make that interpretation, so we'll stick with the blacks and the whites. Optical color mixture. These are colors that can be mixed in light and in pigment by our eyes. So when small patches of color are close together, the eyes can blend them to produce a different color. This George Seurat is a good example of that optical mixing. Our eyes do that. It's not as noticeable today, but myself growing up, you go up to the television, your parents didn't have remote controls, kids were the remote controls. We would spend a lot of time up at the television, and you would get to see that the television is actually made up of a series of colored dots, so that when we stand back, our eyes will optically mix them. Okay, this is actually called pointillism in art. It is an art style of the late 19th century, particularly associated with George Seurat again. This is his most famous piece that you'll see here. You might recognize it. It is a very famous piece. It was featured in the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, when Cameron starts zoning in on that little girl in the white dress on her face, and you zoom in and you see just the spots of color. This is small patches or points of color. When placed close together, they build the form. This piece is actually located in the Chicago Art Institute in Chicago. It's probably the most popular piece, so if you're ever there and you're waiting in line to see it, don't forget to take a look off to the right. There's a great Toulouse-Lautrec piece that I highly suggest you pay attention to. Okay, emotional qualities of color. Colors have associations or emotional symbolism as well as temperatures. So we already kind of talked about this a little bit. Green, envy, cool, fresh, growth, fertility. Remember Arnolfini wedding in her green dress? Blue, sadness, cold, sky, heaven, peace, truth. Red, anger, hot, blood, hell, passion. Okay, there's those emotional qualities. Take a look at the video link. You'll get some more information on that. And there's two actually there. Take a look at both of those. Then we have texture. Texture is a tactile quality of surfaces or visual representation of such surface qualities. It is the nature of a surface. Now, there are two types of texture. There is real and implied. So let's say we have somebody in our class who has kinky curly hair. If we were to go up and touch it, that's real texture. But if someone was to do a painting of their hair, that's implied texture. It's not really there. We can't go up and feel the curls, but it is implying the way that looks. Again, take another look at that video link there on texture. Now, real texture, like I said, is actual texture. It's tactile. Versus that implied. This is a really good example of Chuck Close. Remember, every hair, every pore, he's that guy. That's that visual texture that we see with him. Now, pattern. This is any decorative, repetitive motif or design. It nearly always creates a visual or implied texture. This Gustav Klimt is a really good example. On page 122, figure 5.9 in your text, you'll find another Gustav Klimt piece. Okay, I'm going to end this part and we will extend to part 3 on the next slide.